All right, confession time. I have never cruised, and I can't say that I've ever considered cruising either. I also don't know anyone who has cruised. Do you know anyone who's cruised, Katie?
No.
So everything I think about cruising is based off of pure conjecture. One thing I've observed on travel forums is that people seem to really get hooked on cruising. Like I'll see people post and say, I'm going on my 80th cruise this week. It blows my mind. So welcome back to Alpaca My Bags. I'm your host, Erin. Today I'm joined by Jessica, who also hosts a podcast called Pub Hub. Do you want to tell us about the podcast?
Yeah, it launched at the end of February, so we have about probably 10 episodes up by the time this airs, I would guess. And it's all about the behind-the-scenes look at the publishing industry. So we have authors, we have agents, we have people who work in literary magazines, and they just talk about what it's like to work in the industry and what's happening in the industry.
Awesome. Well, Jessica's going to talk to us about her cruising expertise. So welcome.
Erin, do you have any, I know you have an announcement right now. So what's going on?
It's an important announcement. So many of our listeners know I am allergic to peanuts. So is Katie. And so traveling with a peanut allergy sucks. And the worst part is flying because airlines are such dicks about it. So I'm really happy to announce that EasyJet announced this week that moving forwards, all their flights will be nut-free, not just peanuts, like all nuts. And this is really great and makes total sense because recently a child died on an airline flight. Yeah, from peanuts. So this is really good news. I thought you guys would appreciate knowing. All right, let's get into it. Jessica, can you tell us your background and why you're an expert in cruising?
Okay, so I started out when I was younger. I wanted to be a performer. And when I was a teenager, I found out that a really good way to make money as a younger, new performer is to go work on cruise ships. So from the time I was like 16, 17, I was like, one day I'm going to work on a cruise ship. And then I never applied. And then fast forward to about 10 years later, I had just returned from living in New York. I didn't know what I was doing. And I thought, I'm going to apply to work on a cruise ship. So I ended up working as an entertainment staff member on Carnival Cruise Lines. I did 2 contracts with them. Entertainment staff means that I ran quizzes, I ran events. So anywhere from like 10 guests to 1,000 guests at my events. Wow. I mostly was a karaoke host. I was the comedy club manager for a while and did various other tasks and also did a lot of herding of guests as part of my job. And I worked in the Caribbean out of 3 different ports. So I did a 6-month contract out of New Orleans. Then I did 2 months of a contract out of LA. And then the rest of that contract I did out of Miami.
Whoa. And so when you say 6 months, does that mean for that full 6-month contract you were on a ship?
I was living on a ship working every day for 6 months. You don't get a single day off in my department. And so it's pretty exact 6 months. So my first contract was from like February 25th to August 25th or something like that. So it's like a full 6 months.
Whoa. And had you ever been on a cruise as a guest?
No, I had never been on a cruise ship before. So I, as many people do, imagined what a cruise ship was like. And then as I worked there the first couple of weeks and months, I sort of figured out what cruising is actually like.
Can you tell us what you imagined cruising would be?
Somewhere between Breaker High and the Love Boat, I think was my sort of estimation of what being on a cruise ship was, which was not entirely wrong in some ways and was very wrong in others. I sort of thought that it was closer to, which I was kind of right about, kind of closer to an all-inclusive rather than make your own vacation, kind of like traveling around Europe. So I didn't realize how scheduled it was. But in terms of the sort of activities you do, the sort of ports you go to, I was pretty on par with what it actually was.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that people, when they go on a cruise, think of it as traveling, or do they really think like, no, I'm cruising?
I think that it depends on the guest. I think that there's lots of different reasons that people take cruises. I think there is definitely a faction of guests who think of it more as like traveling and visiting new countries. It depends on where in the world you're going. A Caribbean cruise is much different than like a European cruise or a world cruise or something like that. there's guests who come just to shop. That is their main reason to cruise.
On the ship?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest art dealers in the world works on cruise ships. So there's art auctions all week on cruise ships, and they sell thousands and thousands of dollars of art. So there are people who come for that because there's some artists that are only represented by that art dealer, and then they'll ship $20,000 worth of art home that they bought on the cruise ship. So there's shopping experts, and there's shopping places in each port that are people who want to buy jewelry. A lot of those people can get cheaper jewelry from cruise ships. And then there are people who come to gamble. There are definitely people who come to drink. There are lots of like bachelorette parties on cruise ships. So there's that sort of thing. And then there's families. And then there's people who want to explore and do the excursions and all of that sort of thing. So it's a large mix. There's also a large group of retired people. It's actually cheaper to cruise than live in a retirement home in a lot of places per day, if you like break down the per day. So there are older people who live on cruise ships, and they just go like from cruise ship to cruise ship.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's casinos on the ship.
Yeah. The gambling's like a big part of it. So a ship's broken up into the makeup of most ships is kind of has two long guest kind of public areas. So you have somewhere around like deck 4, you have like a promenade deck, which has a giant casino in the middle, shops on one side usually, possibly like a back pool or something like that on the other side. And then you have your Lido deck, which has like the big pool area and sometimes the spas up there and stuff like that. So yeah, the whole middle of one floor is usually casino.
Whoa. It sounds like a very commercial experience to me.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Vegas-y in some ways. Like, it's kind of supposed to be like a floating, like fun, anything you want to have fun sort of an experience. So there's a lot to do. That's partially commercial because like they have people, you have things called sea days, which is an entire day where you don't port. So you're on the boat for the entire day. So there's two different things. One, they have thousands of guests who need something to do. So, and they can't spend money anywhere else. So like you want to make them spend money with you, and you have to entertain them for the entire day. So you have to offer enough for them to do that they're not going to get bored on an entire day at sea. So yeah.
How crowded are they?
Not really that crowded. Well, during the kind of like day-to-day living, the cruise ship's pretty big. The ones that I were on were usually anywhere between like 12 and 16 stories tall, and they're pretty long. They're like a football field length. So the ones that I were on were roughly around 3,000 guests, 1,500 to 2,000 crew. So about 5,000 people are on board. And you think that would mean like you're, in a crowded space all the time, but it's not really, because there's so many different areas for people to go to that if you go to like the comedy club, yes, there's going to be 600 people trying to get into the comedy club all at once. And like I had karaoke's that had 700 or 800 people at them. Karaoke's very, very popular on cruise ships.
Whoa.
And getting on and off the ship, you're going to be like, oh my God, there's so many people because everybody's trying to get through this. Think of like the end of a flight of like trying to get through one set of doors with like 200 people. So times that by 10, and that's what getting off of a cruise ship is like.
That gives me major anxiety.
Yeah, so there's little things like that are you're like, oh wait, now I remember how many people are here. But when you're like walking down the hall,
it doesn't feel.
It feels like you're walking down a street in Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so what were your first impressions? Like your first cruise?
I had a really interesting, this is kind of a funny story, a really interesting start to my cruise experience. First, I have to say that me cruising was, a lot of people thought was a really dumb idea because I almost drowned 3 times as a kid. So people were like, why are you doing this to yourself? So already I was like, is this a good idea? My second thing was the interview process for getting a cruise ship job is like, I went to a hotel by the airport and there was like a Toronto interview, and then I got emailed my like papers after I got hired, and then they're like, okay, go to the airport, fly to New Orleans, and we'll like put you up in a hotel the night before, and then we'll drive you to the ship. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm about to be trafficked. Like, I was like, I've never really, like, I have no real proof that this is, you know, like, it's not like going to the Carnival building downtown. Like, I was just getting on a plane, right? So I was a little scared there that I was like, how do I know if this is legitimate? So luckily that it turned out fine. It was actually Carnival. So when I got to the hotel, I was like, because it was right after I'd moved to New York, I was like a little bit more okay with like taking giant leaps like that. So I was pretty excited. But the week before I got on my first ship, I don't know if you guys remember when this happened, a Carnival ship lost power in the Gulf of Mexico and was stuck there for like 4 or 5 days, and the toilets backed up, and like everybody was trapped on the ship for like 4 days. And that was a Carnival ship. And that happened literally like a week before I got on my ship. So again, I was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you making this decision? So I was a little like, I was still excited because I knew that was like a rare, weird thing that had happened. But when I got on my ship, there were actually a few crew members who got transferred from that ship who had just like lived through that. So I was really excited. It's because cruise ship staffs are so small. No one can really like train you the way that you get trained at jobs on land where you're like shadowing someone for a week. I literally had one day where they're like, you can come with me to my activities. And then the next day I had my own schedule, and they were like, here, go lead quizzes. And I was like, okay. And like I had guests showing up, and I had to like do my job, but I really had like one day to figure out that sort of thing. Wow. And then so like that was very much like think on your feet and like fake it till you make it sort of a thing. The part that I wasn't actually kind of like, I knew in the back of my mind that it was going to be a part of it, but I didn't realize how responsible each crew member is safety on ships. We have like weekly safety drills. We have to take a test when we get on the ship to like make sure we know what all like the distress signals are. We have to know like a whole bunch of different information about everything to do with the ship, just in case like there's any sort of emergency. You're given like a muster position, which is like if there's an emergency, the lifeboat that you're sort of partially in charge of, and all of that stuff. So learning all of that when you get on your first ship, it is a little daunting because you have to pass that test, and if something were to happen, you are actually responsible for other humans. And so that sort of part of it, I was a little like, oh, this is a lot of pressure right when you first get on, but you figure it out.
How much downtime do you get?
Again, it depends on your job. Because I was entertainment staff, you're supposed to be scheduled for about 40 to 50 hours a week, and then stuff adds onto that sometimes it doesn't. If you miss a port, so if you have like bad weather and you can't actually port somewhere, that means your whole day is screwed and you're working the whole day, because an extra sea day for entertainment means you are on, you have to entertain them. So sometimes my weeks would go up to 60, 70 hours a week. Sometimes we would be a little bit overstaffed, so I would have a few weeks where I would only be working like 30 hours a week. It really depends on what your staff situation is like and all of that. The one thing that's very different from working on land is that they can find you, because if you're not, like, it's not like you went anywhere. So if they need someone to work in 20 minutes, like, you're working in 20 minutes, and unless you're sick, you can't really say no. Yeah. So even your own time is not really your own time. So yeah. Right.
And how does it work visa-wise?
You get what's called a B2 visa. It's like a U.S. Visa to work on the ship, which I'm guessing is different depending on which country you're home ported out of. Mm-hmm. And then it works for your entire cruise. I had to leave, like, I couldn't stay in the U.S. without leaving the country. So a lot of people who want to kind of vacation in the U.S. and who are not American after their cruise will fly to like the Bahamas for 20 minutes so that they can come back in as a regular citizen. Or you can file papers to turn it into a visitor visa. But if you do that, then you can't work for the last like 2 days of the cruise. So you have to like plan it in advance. So I actually did that for my second contract, which is kind of nice because I got to be a guest for like the last like day and a half because I wasn't allowed to work. Nice. So...
Wow, that was a lot. There's like a lot going on these cruises.
Yeah. It's definitely a different traveling experience than anything else.
Yeah.
I get the question a lot is kind of like, what's it like, or like who should cruise, who is it like designed for. And I think it's more closely connected to like all-inclusives than it is to sort of planning your own trip. I think the perfect person to cruise who hasn't before is someone who gets a little bit bored at all-inclusives and wants different stuff, but is okay with like scheduled days and doesn't want the freedom of like planning your own full like week, because you do get to see different countries. You get a lot of different choices of what you do in each port, so you can do everything from like walk around and shop to have like adventures and go zip lining and all of that, to having like cultural experiences in different places. So it's really open for whatever you want to do. It's just that you're spending usually most of your evenings and a couple of full days on the ship. So you need to be the type of person who will be able to be entertained by stuff. It was kind of good for me because I don't really like sitting on the beach. I get very, very bored. So when we went to port, I mean, when as a crew member, when you go into port, your priorities are different than guests. Your priorities are usually internet to talk to your family and like going to the grocery store because the food on ships is not great. So you want to get yourself like snacks and internet is what you want. Guests always try to like follow crew. They're like, where are you going? And we're like, not somewhere you want to go. I'm literally going to sit in an internet cafe and try to call my mom for 6 hours.
You don't get Wi-Fi on the ship?
Wi-Fi exists. It's extremely expensive.
Oh.
It's like basically the speed of dial-up, and it's 10 cents a minute. So you cannot download a movie. Like every crew member, this is kind of like how people think of, I always think of how you think of jail, where like there's different like commodities that you trade, you know, in jail. But on cruise ships, it's hard drives. So portable hard drives full of movies is the like hottest commodity, because when a new person comes on the ship, if they've worked on ships before, the first thing you ask them is like, what new movies did you bring with you? Do you have the newest Marvel movie? Do you have this? And like, yeah, it's a little bit of a different, it's a very sheltered life.
I thought like that ships would have full Wi-Fi access.
Yeah, you'd also think that they would give it to their crew for free, but they don't. So, wow. Yeah.
Okay, last question. This is an important one. Mm-hmm. Do cruise ships ever forget people on land?
Forget is not the right word. Leave people on land every single port.
What happens?
So what happens is people don't plan ahead, and they think that a cruise ship's going to sit there and wait for them. It is thousands upon thousands of dollars to stay in a port late, because there's specialized people who help you get in and out of ports, and a lot of the ports have more than one ship in them every day. So if you're late, you're throwing off their whole schedule, and you're paying for those people. So cruise ships will wait for, I've seen our ship wait for over an hour for people before, but eventually they have to go. They can't wait forever for people, because it's just too much money. So I've seen people running after ships before, and it's just usually because they didn't like pay attention to the time. And sometimes it's because they went on excursions and something happened. And another thing is, a lot of guests, we have like a cruise card it's kind of like your little like credit card / room key when you're on the ship. People will try to get off the ship with that as their only ID. We're like, you're in Mexico. Like, what if you get hurt? Like, the hospital's not going to accept your Carnival card as your like official ID. And they get really mad. They'll be like, why? I don't want to go back to my room and get my driver's license or get my passport. And we're like, but don't you? Like, something could happen to you. And they, oh my God. Like, there's a lot of guests who don't even register that they're in a different country, because they got on the ship, like, in America. They're Americans. And then they get off and they just think that, like, the entire country is like owned by Carnival. I don't know, but like they think that like we're gonna follow them around and help them no matter where they go.
But how do you keep track of who isn't back on the ship?
Oh, so you have to tap on, tap off when you get on and off the ship. Okay. Everybody does. Like, I had a card as well. So they can see how many people tapped out but didn't tap back on. Right. So they'll say like, these 10 people are missing, and if they kind of know those 10 people are together, they'll be like, okay, well, maybe they're on an excursion. They like try to find them or whatever. But if there's like 4 people left and they don't know what happened to them, and we've already waited an hour and a half, they also do have someone in every port who, if someone does get left behind, there's someone to help them. They have to do it at their own expense, and they can either be sent, like, have someone help them go home or go to the next port to catch the ship. But like, so it's not we're like, bye, you're on your own. There is someone there to like help them, but like, you can't just sit there and wait for like 6 hours for someone and hope that they're coming back.
So they're just stuck.
Yeah, people have run after the ship before and not gotten on it. Like,
it must cost them thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't feel bad at all, really, for them, because really. Like, I mean, if it's legitimately not their fault, that sucks. But like, most of the time, it's because somebody got drunk and wasn't paying attention to the time and it like fell asleep on the beach.
Whenever I travel, I get so scared. Like when buses stop, I'm like, I have to keep my eye on that bus. Like, because I saw it happen in India and Southeast Asia. Buses just leaving and like people running after the bus, screaming like, my luggage.
Yeah, that's why I always say, like, if you're someone who doesn't like schedules, don't cruise. Yeah, because like especially like if you get nervous about like times and that's gonna ruin your vacation because you're looking at your watch all the time, cruise ship is not for you.
Yeah. All right, so I wanted to get the opinion of a cruise lover, one of these people I mentioned before who like keep going back for more. So I took to the internet and I hit up good old Quora, the land of questions and answers. So here's the best summarized response that I found. It's actually like very well explained and written. So this was a response to a very direct question: why do people love cruises? And Michelle Gaugi, I don't know if I said her name right, but that's my best try. She wrote about why she loves them. Nicely numbered. Number 1, it's an easy way to see lots of places. Do you see lots of places?
I think that one is, I would put like an asterisk next to that one, because I think you do go to different countries. I don't know if I would count it as like seeing that country the way that like it's kind of similar to like an all-inclusive. You get like this little section.
A glimpse.
Yeah, a glimpse. And you can take excursions that will bring you further into the actual country. But a very small percentage of guests actually I would say immerse themselves in those countries. That's more for the Caribbean. I think that European cruises probably is a little bit different because a lot of Caribbean countries, I think people are scared, and with reason in some of them, and some of them not as much, but to venture out further than like those cruise areas on their own. So it depends, but yeah.
Okay. She also says she likes it because she can join the crowds. She meets people from all over. She can also just settle into a quiet corner with her book. She writes that boats are very large and they are full of nooks and crannies, so it's easy to escape. Plus, I always get a room with a balcony, so if I get too peopled out, there's nothing more relaxing than looking at the ocean go by.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that one. There's so much to do on a cruise ship. The entertainment staff, literally their only job is to like make sure everyone's having fun. You will never see an entertainment staff in a public area without a smile on their face. It's like against the rules. So, and people get really crazy about the activities. Like I've witnessed like close to fist fights over ping pong before. I've had shouting matches over quizzes. I have a relatively funny story. It was terrifying for me at the time, but it's funny now. Where I was doing a sports trivia, and the sports trivia was in the sports bar. So it was a week-long trivia. It was a cumulative trivia. So I had these bros, these guys who were playing with me all week. They loved it. They thought I was funny because I know nothing about sports, so I kept butchering names, and like I was like, and every single time I would butcher a name, I'd be like, it's the Canadian pronunciation of that player's name. And they'd be like, no, it's not, you just know nothing about football. I'd be like, accurate, I know nothing about football. And I was like, and I of course got all the hockey players' names right. So I was playing with these guys all week, and then the last day, the final, coincided with like an March Madness game or something like that. So there was a bunch of guys who were there who wanted to watch the game that were not part of my trivia. And I was like, I'm going to turn the TVs off for like 20 minutes to play my trivia. They lost it. Oh no. Lost it. Like, were screaming at me. Like, you would have thought they had bet their entire house on this game. But I literally had to have eventually a line of my guys in front of me who were like playing with me all week being like, can you step away from her? Like, you stop, like, yelling. And I had to negotiate with, like, my boss on one phone and, like, these guys to only switch half the TVs, and I was going to take the sound because I needed the sound for my trivia, but, like, I had to do it as quickly as possible. I wasn't allowed to do, like, my tallying of scores and my announcements in the room. We all had to move to a different room so that we could get out of their space as soon as possible. Like, I felt like it was like a hostage situation that I was, like, negotiating. Like, my boss was like, is this really happening? Are you really? And then the best part was that the guy was like, I'm going to call your boss. I was like, the boss that I'm talking to, who's on my side, do you want to talk to him? And, like, it was like, people are very invested in like cruise activities.
Whoa.
There was another time where I had another cumulative cruise where going into the last day, I lost everyone's scores. And I was, like, walking the trivia. I was like, oh crap, I don't know who's winning. I don't know what. So luckily I thought quickly and I was like, let's just have a reminder. What was your score? And, like, where were you? And they all just were like, I had 96 points. I was like, great. I was like, yep, you all got your scores right. We all know where we're sitting. But they would have killed me. They would have legitimately killed me if I had lost their scores. So.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay. Michelle says that the food is excellent.
For guests, yes.
She also says you unpack only once. There's no packing and unpacking, even though you're going all over the place. It's a valid point.
It is. And I think it's a very big pro for cruises because, it's a floating hotel. So you just get dropped off in a new country every day. Here, go have fun. And it's very low maintenance for you.
Yeah, it's so true. Always lots of entertainment. We've
Yep.
covered that.
Yep.
And this was the most interesting thing she says, I thought. Since it is like a self-contained village, albeit a floating one, it's like its own little world. For me, that makes it really feel like a total getaway. I can relax on a cruise, which isn't always the case on other vacations.
Yeah. And we have something called that we used to call cruise brain, which is, or like vacation brain, which is people turning off their brain. Because the most common, I like, I'm not joking about this at all. The most common question you get on cruise ships is, do these stairs go up?
No.
People, can I get to my room from here is another one of my favorites. Do you live on the ship? You get at least like 6 times a cruise. You're like, no, they fly us in every single day to do activities for you and then fly us back at like people just, they're on vacation. They total brain shutdown. They don't want to think about anything from their life. Does this elevator go to the front of the ship? Is another one of hers. I was like, yes, it's the Willy Wonka elevator. It goes wherever you want. But people will ask you these questions with a totally straight face.
Oh my God.
Yeah, do these stairs go up is my favorite question.
Okay. So the only anecdote that I have related to cruising is from when I lived in Venice, Italy, which I'm sure you know is a super, super popular spot for Mediterranean cruises. So I knew the days and the times that ships would arrive because the city would become like an insane asylum. Like, it was insane. Just so many people. So I'd be like, okay, cruise is going to show up at 1 o'clock. Like, I have to grocery shop in the morning today. Otherwise, I won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
Because it'd be so crowded. It would just be too frustrating trying to get around the city. Because, like, I'm sure you know, that city has really small streets. If there's traffic jams, like too many people in Venice, it's a nightmare. And I would avoid like specific areas of the city, which is really interesting, like in retrospect, because Piazza San Marco is the famous square. I don't think I ever spent time there when I was living there. Yeah. And in contrast to other parts of the city, like I lived kind of on the outskirts of Venice. It was a completely different world, quiet, and people, it would really bother me because people would come to Venice and say, oh, I don't like it. It's so crowded and smelly and it's just too hectic and busy. And that wasn't the real Venice. It was because of these friggin' cruise ships that would drop off like thousands of people. Yeah. I definitely developed a bit of a prejudice against cruise ships. Not the people on them, just like the act of the cruise
I would be okay if it was the people on them. Honestly, I have a bit of a prejudice against some of them. So.
But then it was also in Dubrovnik, Croatia, where I distinctly remember cruise ships being a thing because I was staying in this like cute little hostel outside of the old town, and the hostel staff were like, if you want to go into town, you have to go first thing in the morning. If you go in the afternoon, it's going to be a mess. Like, go in the morning. So even like and it's kind of wild to think that like it actually bothers tourists. Like, I was a tourist being warned to avoid a space because of that. And it's interesting I bring that up because both those cities are now introducing restrictions on cruise ships. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So now we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about overtourism to relate to the larger conversation around cruising. So an article from the website and company Responsible Travel phrased it really well. Overtourism occurs when there are too many visitors to a particular destination. Too many is obviously a subjective term, but it's defined in each destination by local residents, hosts, business owners, and other tourists. So when rent prices push out local tenants and make way for holiday rentals, that's an example of a way that overtourism can happen. Or when narrow roads become jammed with tourist vehicles, that's also overtourism. Or when wildlife is scared away, or when tourists like can't view landmarks because of the crowds. All signs of overtourism, which I've definitely experienced. And all my examples are Europe. Europe, in my experience, is awful for overtourism nowadays. We were in Paris earlier this year, and there were like multiple times that overtourism bothered us. We didn't go to the, what's it called, like the underground crypts. Do you know about those?
Yeah.
We really wanted to see them, and we got there and the line was 3 hours long. Yeah. And people wait in these lines, and we were like, we're only here for 48 hours. I'm not going to spend 3 hours of my day standing in the rain to spend an hour inside this site. Like, I'd rather sit in a cafe.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing about Versailles. That the wait is too long for what it actually is.
Versailles
and every single room is so crowded that you don't even really get to experience it.
Yeah, that was actually another example I was going to give, because Versailles was a place that I was so excited to see, and it was ruined. It was honestly ruined because I just couldn't experience it.
Yeah, I'd just be nervous at all the people taking selfies around like priceless artifacts.
Totally. Yeah. And I was going to bring that up too. So same trip in Paris. We were literally trying to find like ways to avoid overtourism. We were like, let's go to the Louvre. It's huge. No, don't have to wait in a line. Like, it was raining, so it made sense. And while we were in there, I was like, my two friends had seen the Mona Lisa, but I hadn't. So I insisted that we go and see it. And it was pure insanity. I've never seen so many people like around a paint, like you couldn't see it.
Yeah.
I had to push for like 20 minutes to get up to the front. All these phones are like whacking me in the head. It was just like not the experience you would expect to have when seeing like a priceless piece of art.
Yeah. It's so strange to me, that mindset of like, I'm going to push for 20 minutes to take a picture of a picture, and that's like the whole thing I'm going to do when I get up there. It's like, all right, well, that picture of a picture is on the internet already if you really want it.
Yeah, like I can see it in better detail online than I can in person.
Yeah, or you could just look at it with your actual eyes and like experience what you actually came here to experience.
Yeah, so many cities in Europe have reported issues around over-tourism, including Barcelona, London, Dubrovnik. And it's become such a divisive issue in Amsterdam that now it's one of the key debating points in upcoming city council elections. And I have Dutch family, so I know this for a fact, that people vote based on that.
I'm going there this summer. My entire family's Dutch, so we're going for 2 weeks.
No way! Yeah. Okay, we're talking about this after the podcast, because I'm going to tell you.
I come back after my trip.
Yeah. Have you experienced over-tourism?
Definitely. I think in different ways, because I was in the Caribbean. As like I talked a little bit about kind of the setup that cruise ships have made in the different ports, and with all the shopping, they kind of, in a lot of the bigger ports, they've now created their own little like, it's kind of like a strip mall, like right when you get into the port, of like a bunch of shops and a few restaurants and stuff like that. And then the rest of the country and it's all like bright and pretty and new. And then the rest of the country is kind of like on the other side of that. And you can go if you want and not. So, I have kind of like two different opinions about it. I think that a lot of the places that these cruise ships are going to, people wouldn't go to otherwise. And there wouldn't be a whole lot of tourism, which means there wouldn't be a lot of money coming in from that tourism. So I think that there is it is helping those communities in a way. It's also kind of bringing in their own things and probably closing down local things in the process. So I think that it's a double-edged sword in that sort of way.
What were your observations when you pulled into like the same ports over and over again, if any?
Well, like I said, like the cruise priorities in ports are a little bit different. When you go into ports like once a week, you kind of feel a little bit safer to go a little bit off the beaten trails and explore a little bit more, and you see a little bit more of the locals, which can be great, and you can see a little bit more behind the veil. Is that the thing of things? So like I got to meet a lot more like locals and go into local restaurants and eat a lot more local food, which is amazing. But you also see how locals are interacting with guests in different ways. Like a few ports, you'd have people who were selling stuff, like locals who were selling stuff. And sometimes you'd see them and you'd see only children. And you'd be like, oh, they're orphan children or whatever. And then the next week you'd come and they'd have like parents. And then the next week you'd come, they'd have different parents. And so it's probably like families who are sending, who's going out today, and that sort of stuff. But you see a little bit more of that whole like manipulation of trying to manipulate the guests, but also people who likely could use that money. And there's thousands of people coming in with American dollars. There's flip sides of that sort of thing as well. So yeah, there's definitely people who are to take advantage on the local side, and there's definitely like a lot that the cruise ships are taking advantage in ports. So you see both sides of it. But it was really interesting to be a crew member, because when locals see you often enough, they treat you differently than the guests so they're not trying to sell stuff to you as much because they know they can't get away with some of the things and stuff. So yeah, it is a different experience.
And that observation, I would argue, is true like of anyone as a tourist in any country. It's certainly been my experience, but I think the difference is that it's very easy for the locals to identify that someone's come from a cruise, and because you've just stepped off ship and you're only on land for however many hours, you haven't spent enough time there to figure out how much you should pay for. Like for example, in India, eventually we realized, okay, a bottle of water should never be more than 10 rupees. And once you learn that, you'll never pay more than 10 rupees. But in the beginning, we were paying like 30 rupees for water. It's a learned thing as you travel, and I could see cruising being a disadvantage in that area because it's much easier to take advantage of someone who has no idea what the price for something should be.
But also guests, I feel like, don't care. They don't want to spend the time haggling for prices and stuff like that, and they've set aside a certain amount of money. So like, all the power to the locals for getting those American dollars.
It brings up an interesting element, though, and this was something I noticed when I was doing the resort in Cuba. The town, I'm sure you know it, Veradero, is the resort town. And there was such a disparity of wealth around that town. Like anyone who lived in Veradero compared to every other Cuban or every other place we went in Cuba was like disproportionately wealthy. So in this case, like if you're in Grand Cayman and you're living right by the port, you'll probably be more wealthy because you've access to this market of tourism.
Grand Cayman is a little bit different because it's a British island, so everyone who lives in Grand Cayman is not everyone, but Grand Cayman is a very rich island.
The lead.
So
Or like anyone in those places less wealthy.
Definitely
stops.
Mexico, in the places that you stop in Mexico and like places like that. There are different ways that you can get into a cruise port. There's like the dock right downtown, drop everybody off, which is in a place like Cozumel is what happens. And then there's drop people off in a place that's a little bit further from downtown, and people can sort of choose where they want to go. And then the third one is called tendering, which means the water is not deep enough for you to go all the way into port. So you have to get onto little tender boats, which usually hold anywhere between like 80 and 250 people, and they bring you in on these smaller boats. So a place like Belize does this. Belize, the tender boat is about a 45-minute trip because there's a big giant reef. So what happens there is you can go to two different places. The people who want to go explore Belize and like the port go to one place, and all the people who are going on excursions go in a different area. It's chaos to try to get off the ship. It's the most I've ever been screamed at in my life. That's an entirely different portion of it. But in terms of like, I kind of prefer that sort of setup because moving people to different places means that you're going to have less people in one spot. So if you have everybody walking out the same set of doors and there's the entire city in front of them, you're going to have that crowds. Whereas if everybody has to choose before they get off the ship where they're going, you're going to have 100 people choose this place, 200 people choose this place, 1,000 people choose this place, whatever. So I think that that's a little bit less strain. And I think that that's a good idea for places who are thinking about like adding a cruise ship port. I don't know if any of them are listening to this, but that's my suggestion. Whereas it is a little bit more difficult when you pull 4 ships into the same downtown location, all within the same few hours. Of course, you're going to have thousands of people getting out those same doors and walking around. But I lived in New York and never went to Times Square because it was too crowded. Yeah. And like, that's not a cruise ship thing. It's just a tourist thing. So I think that you can't put all of the onus on just cruises, because a lot of like Venice, there's going to be tourists whether or not there are cruise ships in Venice. And tourists are out and about the same times. Most tourists like to go out between like 10 and 6 or whatever is kind of like their exploring time. So I mean, it's kind of the way that the city has organized that and stuff like that. So yeah.
You touched on this a little bit already, but do you think there are countermeasures that can be taken, like besides dropping people off in different areas? Yeah,
one thing I would love to see more for cruise lines is more working with local tour companies and kind of like offering more local experiences instead of instilling their own, like, we're going to create a zip line park. Like, instead, like, working with and trying to get people to do different things in different parts of whatever country you're in, because I think a lot of times that could be not too expensive for people. A lot of the times when people get off the ship and are just walking around, it's because they want the cheapest option. So working more with locals to give people more options will help, and it's also going to bring more money into the local economy, which I think would be great as well. And as I said, like, finding ways to not drop people off in the middle of an already busy area, I think is like helpful to everyone. So yeah.
And that's interesting. I'm going to bring up Venice again because that's somewhere where they are taking a countermeasure to change that. So from what I remember, the ships would drop people off basically right by Piazza San Marco. And now they're building another port, and I forget what the term you used was, like they bring you in by boat? Tender. Yeah. They're going to tender people to this spot, and then they'll have to walk to the island. Yeah. So they'll be accessing the island from a different spot. Not directly, because the problem with San Marco is like that is the tourist epicenter. So then if you suddenly dump hundreds of people there, it's just overwhelming. Yeah. So I say my sense is that will make a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing about that is kind of a sort of negative to tendering a little bit, but it does also mean less people get off the ship, is there's accessibility issues with tendering, because a lot of people who cruise are older, and getting onto the tender boats and stuff like that obviously is not as accessible as just being able to like go down a ramp onto a dock. So you do have a lot more people staying on the ship in tender ports than you do in ports where you can go right up to the dock.
Right. Yeah. So some of the countermeasures that I researched, for example, Dubrovnik, the amount of cruise ships allowed to dock every day has been capped, and this seems to be the most common form of countermeasure is restrictions on the amount of cruise ships that are being allowed. So in Dubrovnik, there's a maximum now per day, and I guess cruise ships have to compete for that spot.
Yeah. So it's going to be the more expensive cruises that are going to be there.
Yeah. So it'll make it less accessible by cruise.
Yeah, I wonder, that one, they're capping it by number of people, right?
I think so.
I wonder if they're including crew in those numbers. It'd be interesting. I mean, already you have smaller ships in Europe than you do in the Caribbean, just because of the waterways. They can't support the huge like Royal Caribbean ships that you see in the Caribbean.
Right.
So they're already able to control their numbers a little bit more. I would be interested to see if in the coming years, if some of the Caribbean ports do something similar. Because some of them are building bigger docks and allowing for more people. And because Royal Caribbean and other cruise lines are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger ships, like I think there's a Royal Caribbean ship now that has like over 5,000 guests on it. That's just guests. That's not even including crew. So yeah, like that when that one pulls into town, like you can't help it. It's going to increase. It also has like a skating rink in it. So
I actually read somewhere that one of the complaints in Venice, and it's true, was that the ships were so large they would block sunlight.
Oh, yeah.
So locals were like, I don't get the sun anymore.
Yeah.
Because the ship pulls in and suddenly the sun's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a little solo trip a couple years ago where I went from Colombia to Costa Rica, and I was on a sailboat for 5 days and getting from Colombia to Panama, and we were doing these like little islands that are in between there, and they had these like tiny little cruise ships with like a few hundred people on them, and still when they like pulled up to a nearby island, our like little sailboat was like, well, we should leave because this is not going to be less peaceful and fun when they get here. So yeah.
So I was interested in looking at other countermeasures, like aside from cruise ships that are being taken to reduce the impact of over-tourism. So in Amsterdam, for example, tourist taxes are being introduced to offset the influx of visitors. So I think right now they're pitching around €10 per person per day.
Yeah, we're seeing that now because my family's booking Airbnbs, and it's even like every Airbnb, it's like, by the way, you're going to have to pay this when you get here.
And do you know how you pay it? Is it at the airport?
I'm not sure because it says right on the Airbnb thing, like we've added it to like, so I don't know if it's like there's like a per night something. I don't know how.
Right, they might factor it into if you're staying in a hostel or Airbnb or hotel. Yeah, that would make sense. I was kind of peeved because I have so much family in the Netherlands. So I was like, do I have to pay this tax? Like when I go to Amsterdam and don't really, because I don't stay in the city. I stay on the outskirts with family. So I was like, I don't know, the logistics of this might be hard, but it would make sense to factor it into paying for your night. Yeah.
And it's like, I see why they're doing it. It makes traveling less accessible to less people because you need to have more income on to be able to pay those fees. So that makes me sad because I think that a lot of younger people have the energy to backpack and all of that stuff, but might not have money to be paying $10 everywhere that they go. That's super touristy. So
and it's interesting you bring that up because when I backpacked Europe, I was like barely 20, and the amount of money I needed to survive for a day was like a quarter of what it is now. I wouldn't be able to afford to do it now. So the island in Boracay in Philippines was closed to tourists for 6 months because that island needed to rehabilitate its ecosystem. This has also happened in Thailand, so I guess that's another big concern. I will touch on it a little bit, like the issue of environmentalism in cruise ships and the impact that they're having. But we're actually going to be doing an episode on environmentalism and travel, so we're only going to briefly touch on that today. So this is what I found online about it. So according to articles from Vox and Slate, their heavy and growing use of fossil fuels means that someone on a 7-day cruise produces the same amount of emissions that they would during 18 days on land, which is pretty extreme. Ships can damage fragile ocean ecosystems due to practices like irresponsible disposal of sewage. CO2 emissions double on a ship compared to what the average North American generates in emissions on land at home. Slate compared the amount of emissions that a person would generate on a 7-day cruise from Miami to Grand Cayman versus flying from Miami to Grand Cayman and just spending a week in a resort. And a cruise's overall impact is considerably more. With that said, cruising companies have acknowledged this, and many of them are working towards more sustainable cruising. What was your experience like on ship?
Well, they preach a lot of environmental stuff on the ship, of like what they're doing.
Right.
I went on to ships in 2013, 2014 was when I was on there. And I think they started a lot of these stats and looking more into it a little bit before that. So they had already started on my cruise line with all like the measures to try to reduce. So we heard about like ways they separate all the water into like gray water. I don't even remember the levels. It's like gray water, dark water, and clear water or whatever, so that they can control what they're like sending back into the ocean and what they need to bring to like other places and what they can reuse and all of that stuff. So I knew about all of that. There's they just started initiatives on a few cruise lines to, I don't think it was on mine yet, but to donate unused food so that there would be less food waste. And so we heard about kind of like that sort of stuff. We weren't really involved in it, obviously. Like I was in entertainment.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really involved in their environmental measures, but it seemed like it was in their best interest as well to do those things, like using less like fuel or whatever is cheaper for them. So like, why wouldn't they want to do that? And stuff like, I'm actually surprised that they haven't taken advantage of like solar power and stuff like that. Cause like you're on the ocean, there's like, especially for Caribbean ships, I feel like that's like free energy that you're not using.
Yeah.
But the stat about the comparing the trip to Grand Cayman versus cruising, I think is a little bit skewed because there is no such thing as a cruise that just goes to Grand Cayman and then goes back.
True.
It's going to stop in other countries on the way. It's not the same as being dropped off in an all-inclusive. So I think that if each of those guests took the same trip, planes each way, and like stayed in hotels each way, it would probably be closer to even, or even more on the side of cruises being more like environmental. But yeah, it's hard for me to say too, because there's this thing in the media where they like to like tell these big stories about cruises and that they're not safe and that everybody gets sick all the time, and like every few months you hear this story and you're like, why are you like, this is not how it is. I'm literally on this ship right now, and like you're making it sound like there's like an epidemic of whatever. And so there's a lot of like sensationalizing of cruises. So I see that side of it, but also it is a big giant ship that's holding 5,000 people. Yeah, I'm assuming that it's going to have like lots of carbon emissions and all that.
And that's so true. Like when you put it that way, and this is the reality of traveling by plane, flying is awful for the environment.
Yeah, definitely.
It really is. And so, in that sense, like maybe a cruise isn't that much worse, if even. Yeah,
well, I did look it up, and Carnival started like they wanted to reduce their carbon emissions by 25% by 2020, and they actually achieved that in 2017, and they've surpassed that now.
Wow.
And they've increased their ships by like 10 more and still have reduced those numbers. So
awesome.
I feel like they are trying, and Carnival owns basically every cruise line except for Royal Caribbean and Norwegian is owned by Carnival. So it's a lot. It's over 200 ships.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, this is what I found online. According to traveler.com, many ships are moving away from the traditionally heavy fuels to alternative technologies. So, for example, marine gas oil or liquefied natural gas. And they're also coming up with new hull designs that are reducing drag on the ship, which will reduce the amount of fuel that's used. So some companies are looking at their supply chain and sourcing sustainable fish, free-range eggs, and locally sourced produce. Cruise lines are increasingly working with communities, particularly in remote parts of the world, to design itineraries that showcase cultures and reduce impacts. So that ties back to what you were saying about tapping into like local guides and like local travel companies instead of creating their own.
Yeah, and also another thing too is when cruises like go into new ports, they have like ownership of that kind of like area. So when disaster strikes, sometimes they're really good at going in and helping. Like Carnival donated 2 of their ships during Katrina for students and people who had been displaced to live on for several months before they got their like homes back. So, and they've gone into like places that have had like hurricanes and tsunamis and stuff like that in other places, because that's part of their income too, right? Like, so, and they do like to give back to those communities if something happens. So there's also that part of it too.
Wow, that's good to hear. Well, overall, I must say, like, I'm a little bit into the cruising idea now. Like, I'm not totally against it. Maybe when I'm retired.
Yeah. I think when you're done, like, wanting to plan your own trip and you're ready to, like, just go and relax and let someone else take care of it, I feel like a cruise is a good option.
Yeah.
It also is a pretty economical option.
Is it?
Because it brings you to several countries for, like, the price of what you would get for one. So.
How much would it cost?
You can do a week cruise for, if you get it during, like, a good discounty kind of time, like $700-800 for, like, an interior cabin. And that
No
includes,
way!
Yeah, that includes your food on the ship.
Whoa, I thought they were like thousands of dollars.
There are cruises that are thousands of dollars, but
I can do a cheapie cruise.
Yeah, like go on a Carnival cruise. Cruises, Carnival. This is like the sort of not nice name for it, but Carnival is known as like the Walmart of cruises because they're the cheapest option. And then Royal Caribbean is kind of like the next up, and then you go all the way up into your like Princess cruises and the Queen Mary 2 and all of those that are way more expensive.
Right.
But it is a relatively like cheap vacation, which is why a lot of people do it.
I don't know why I thought they were so expensive. I might actually do one.
No, yeah.
I just feel like I would feel a little suffocated, like being stuck on a ship and having times to be places.
You have to jump in with both feet on a cruise and like accept that this is kind of like the type of vacation you're gonna have, and then it can be amazing. And I think you have to give up the fact that like you're not going to be able to have the like in the country experiences that you would have traveling on your own, especially for someone like you who's used to going to places for an extended amount of time. Like you have to pick kind of one thing to do in every port, and you're not going to feel like you've been to that country in the way that you're probably used to traveling.
Yeah, we talked about this. So we did an episode on Cuba where we talked about this, and that was the only time I've ever been in an all-inclusive resort, and it was completely different, obviously, than like traveling Cuba was. But this is something that like my partner and I talk about a lot is we travel, but like when we travel, we go hardcore. We don't sleep a lot. We get up early.
Yeah, it's a trip, not a vacation.
It's intense. Yeah. And so sometimes we're like, it'd be really nice just to go and just like give in to the fact that we're not traveling, like this is vacation. Yeah. And so that's why I'm interested in a cruise, because it's cheap and we can just go and chill out. Yeah. And not be travelers.
Yeah. And if your kind of like trip brain comes in and you're like, oh my God, I can't just sit and read a book all day, there's going to be other options for you. Yeah. Whereas I feel like at an all-inclusive, a lot of times during the day, unless you want to like go out on a jet ski, like they're expecting you to just sit on the beach all day. Yeah. So
I actually
a cruise does not
bored.
A cruise does not expect that of you at all.
Sweet.
There's literally someone who's paid at between the hours of 8 a.m. to 1 a.m, at least one person every single day to make sure you're having fun and give you something to do. So, and just look up a bunch of random facts and go play trivia. It's entertaining on multiple levels.
That's so fun.
You get to win little trophies. People love them. They're little ships, and they say the name of on Carnival, and they say the name of the ship on them, and people collect them. People try to go on all the Carnival ships and win one trophy on each ship. And they try to bribe you by the end of the week if they haven't won one. They'll be like, I'll give you $20 for a ship, and you're like, it's plastic. Why do you want it so bad?
Yeah, I could totally get sucked into a cruise, I think. Yeah. Hold on, there was something funny I wanted to ask. Oh yeah, did you ever become like really good friends with guests? Were there like guests that you jive with?
I had a couple experiences where guests added me to Facebook, and I don't know how they found out my last name.
That's creepy.
And like, yeah, like I would have a really good time on the ship with them. And there's one of the best things about working, especially in the entertainment department, is you have people coming up to you. If you've done a good job and you've like, whatever, you have people coming up to you at the end of the week saying you made my vacation, which is amazing. And I would get given gifts, and like sometimes people would bring me a bottle of wine and say like, oh, as a karaoke host, you like made this vacation for us. Or one time I had a story of a couple who just got married, and they so it was their honeymoon, but they both lost their jobs, so they had no money, so they had already paid for this cruise, so they were like, we're not leaving the ship the whole week, we're only able to do the stuff that like we prepaid for, but like we've been so stressed out because we both lost our jobs within the last like few months, and we got married, and that's expensive, but they're like, you guys have made this week so stress-free and so fun for us, so like thank you, because we really like needed it.
I feel like I've done a full turnaround on like being very critical of cruises, and now I'm like, yeah, I kind of get it.
Like, as I was saying, like, the media seems to not like cruise ships for some reason, and every single story they tell is very, very negative. So, like, when I was on a cruise ship, one of the things you're always talking about is like, why does NBC hate Carnival so much, or why does this newsline hate us? Like,
well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been such an enlightening discussion.
No problem. I had fun.
I feel like I've learned so much that I did not know.
I'm always happy to educate people on the cruising life.
Tell us more about your podcast. Where can we find it to listen?
We are on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, as well as at www.thisispubhub.com. There's a link there as well. And girthradio.com as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie, for making us sound so great. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find us on Instagram at alpacamyBagsPod, or our website, which is alpacamybags.ca. And if you like what you're hearing, please let us know by reviewing the podcast. It also helps us if you subscribe and tune in every other Wednesday for more episodes. I hope y'all get to alpaca your bags soon. Until next time.